Okay, so we're diving into the world of ABA therapy today.
Right.
Specifically, we're zeroing in on this idea of reinforcement.
Okay.
It's like when you think about it, you've got this whole toolbox of techniques and approaches, and reinforcement is like right there at the heart of it. It's
Absolutely.
like the cornerstone of ABA therapy, according to like all of our sources.
It really is.
So I guess like for anyone who's new to this whole thing,
Yeah.
how would you explain what reinforcement actually means, like in plain English?
Well, it sounds more complicated than it is.
Right.
At its core, it's the idea that you can encourage certain behaviors
Okay.
by associating them with something positive.
Okay. So like if you do this, you get that kind of thing.
Exactly. It's like our brains are wired to seek out those good feelings.
Right.
So when a behavior leads to something enjoyable or rewarding,
Makes sense.
we're more likely to repeat it in the future.
It's like that aha moment, right?
Exactly.
When you figure out what makes your kid tick.
Yes, and the beauty of reinforcement in ABA
Mm-hmm.
is that it's not about forcing or manipulating behavior.
Right. It's not about like tricking them or anything. Right?
Exactly. It's about working with how our brains naturally learn and respond.
That makes sense.
It's about creating that supportive and motivating environment where kids want to learn and grow.
Okay, I like that. So it's not just about like the immediate reward.
Right.
It's about setting them up for like long-term success.
Exactly. And that's a key point
Okay.
because there are different types of reinforcement.
Okay.
And it's about finding what works best for each individual child.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Each kid is unique.
Right.
And what motivates one child might not have the same effect on another.
So it's about figuring out what their currency is, so to speak.
Exactly. What are they willing to work for? What gets them excited?
I love that. And like we're not just talking about candy and toys here.
Not at all. Although those can be effective.
Right. Sometimes you got to go for what works. But our sources mention a whole bunch of different types of reinforcement, like
Okay.
positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, even like primary and secondary reinforcers. It sounds very official.
It does, doesn't it?
It does. So I guess let's break those down a bit, starting with like positive reinforcement,
Okay, so positive reinforcement.
which I think most people kind of have an idea of.
Yeah, it's the most intuitive, I'd say.
Right.
It's basically you're adding something positive to
Oh.
the child's experience
Yeah.
after they display a desired behavior.
Okay.
So let's say a child cleans up their toys without being asked.
Right.
You might offer praise.
Good job.
Exactly. Or a sticker on a reward chart.
So it's like, you do something good, you get something good.
Exactly. It's that simple.
Okay. Makes sense.
And it taps into that innate desire for positive feedback that we all have.
Right. Everyone likes to be told they're doing a good job.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's positive reinforcement. Pretty straightforward.
Yeah. Now, negative reinforcement.
Okay, this is where it gets a little, I don't know.
Yeah, the term itself can be a bit misleading.
It sounds a bit, I don't know, harsh almost.
It does. But it's really important to understand that negative reinforcement is not punishment.
Okay, good. Good to clarify that.
It's about increasing a desired behavior
Okay.
by removing something unpleasant.
So, like, instead of adding something good, you're taking away something bad.
Exactly. So, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
let's say your child really dislikes a particular chore.
Okay, like, I don't know, folding laundry.
Sure, folding laundry, and you want them to, say, finish their homework.
Okay.
You might say,
Mhm.
if you finish your homework now,
Okay.
you don't have to fold laundry tonight.
So it's like you're giving them a break from something they don't enjoy.
Exactly. You're removing that aversive stimulus.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's still a reward, just in a different way.
Exactly. And it can be very effective for certain kids.
Interesting. Okay, so we've got positive reinforcement, we've got negative reinforcement.
Now we're getting into the really, technical sounding stuff.
Right, primary and secondary reinforcers.
Yes, hit me with it. What are those?
Okay, so primary reinforcers,
Mhm.
these are things that are inherently rewarding
Okay.
because they satisfy basic biological needs.
So we're talking food, water, sleep.
Exactly. Things we need to survive.
Okay.
Those are primary reinforcers.
Makes sense.
Secondary reinforcers, on the other hand,
Okay.
they gain their value through learning and association.
Okay. So it's like they're not inherently rewarding in and of themselves.
Exactly. They become rewarding because we've learned to associate them with something else that is rewarding.
Okay. So give me an example. Help me wrap my head around this.
Okay, so let's say you have a sticker chart.
Okay. Classic.
Right. The stickers themselves.
They're not inherently rewarding. Right. It's a piece of paper.
Right. It's not like they're magically delicious or anything.
Exactly. But they become rewarding because
Okay.
they can be exchanged for something else the child finds rewarding.
Okay, so it's like the sticker is a symbol for something else.
Exactly. And that something else could be a primary reinforcer.
Like a treat or a toy or something.
Or it could be another secondary reinforcer.
Oh, so it can be like a whole chain of associations.
Exactly.
Wow, our brains are weird.
They are fascinating, that's for sure.
They are, and that's what makes this stuff so interesting.
I agree.
Because it's like we're trying to understand like the inner workings of this incredibly complex organ
Yeah.
and how we can, work with it to help kids thrive.
And not just kids, but ourselves too.
Oh, that's a whole other deep dive. But you're totally right.
Right.
It's like this stuff applies to everyone.
It really does.
Okay, but before we go down that rabbit hole,
Right.
we've got to take a quick break.
Okay.
But when we come back, we'll be diving into how to actually put all of this into practice.
Sounds good.
So don't go anywhere. So before the break, we were getting into like all the different types of reinforcement.
We were digging into those.
Yeah, but knowing the types, it's kind of just the beginning, right?
It is. It's like having all the ingredients, but not knowing how to make the recipe, you know?
Totally. Like I can have all the flour and sugar in the world,
Right.
but that doesn't mean I can bake a cake, right?
Exactly. So knowing the types of reinforcement, it's a great start,
Mm-hmm.
but the real magic happens when you start to understand how to use those tools.
Right, how to actually put them into practice.
Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting.
Because, like we were saying before, every kid is different.
Absolutely.
So what works for one might not work for another at all.
Exactly. That's why it's so important to really know your child.
Right, like what motivates them, what gets them excited.
Yes. And even, what are their triggers? What are the things they really want to avoid?
Because that can help you figure out negative reinforcement strategies, right?
Exactly. So observation is key.
Okay, so you got to become a detective, basically.
Kind of. You're looking for those patterns,
Right.
those things that consistently elicit certain responses.
Okay, so let's say you've done your detective work. You've got a pretty good handle on what makes your kid tick. What's next?
Well, once you have a sense of what motivates your child,
Okay.
the next step is to be consistent.
Okay, so we're talking about setting clear expectations.
Yes, and sticking to them.
Because kids can sniff out inconsistency like nobody's business, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Like they know when you're not being genuine.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's not just about, being fair, although that's important too,
Right.
but it's also about the brain's learning process.
Okay, how so?
Well, when we're consistent with our reinforcement,
Mm-hmm.
we're helping to create those strong neural pathways.
Okay, so it's the more consistent we are,
Yes,
the stronger those connections become.
exactly. And that's what leads to lasting change.
Interesting. So it's not just about changing the behavior in the moment. It's about rewiring their brains for the long haul.
Exactly. Which is why consistency is so crucial.
So how do we make sure we're being consistent, especially when we're talking about a whole team of people, right? Because it's not always just parents.
Right. It takes a village, as they say.
Exactly. So how do we get everyone on the same page?
Well, communication is key, obviously.
Okay, so regular check-ins with teachers, therapists, caregivers.
Exactly. Everyone needs to be on board with the plan.
And the plan can change, right?
Oh, absolutely.
This isn't about setting it and forgetting it.
Not at all.
It's about being flexible, adapting as needed.
Right. You have to be willing to adjust your approach based on how your child is responding.
So it's we're constantly observing, assessing, tweaking.
Exactly. And that's where data collection comes in.
Okay, now I know that sounds kind of intimidating.
It can.
I'm not a scientist. I don't have a lab coat or anything.
Right. But it doesn't have to be complicated.
Okay, so what are we talking about here?
It can be as simple as just jotting down some notes.
Okay.
Like what's working, what's not working.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any new interests you've noticed? Any changes in behavior?
So it's we're just paying attention, looking for patterns.
Exactly. And then you use that information to fine-tune your approach.
Makes sense. So we're being detectives and scientists.
Exactly. It's all about observation, experimentation, and adjustment.
I like it.
And, it's important to celebrate those wins along the way.
Oh, absolutely. Because this stuff can be tough.
It can be. So it's important to acknowledge those victories, both big and small.
Because even small steps forward are still steps forward.
Right, exactly. And celebrating those wins, it helps to keep everyone motivated.
Right. It's a reminder that we're making progress.
Exactly. And it helps to build that sense of teamwork and collaboration.
Which is essential when you're talking about something as important as helping a child thrive, right?
Absolutely. It really does take a village.
It does. And on that note of teamwork and collaboration, I think it's the perfect time to take a quick break.
Okay.
But when we come back, we'll be exploring how these principles of reinforcement can be applied, not just in therapy, but in other areas of life as well.
I'm excited for that.
Me too.
Yeah.
So don't go anywhere.
Yeah.
You know, it's funny how, like, when you really start to think about this stuff, it's like it's not just about kids, right?
Exactly.
Like, these principles of reinforcement, they apply to, like, everyone.
They really do.
It's about human behavior at its core.
Absolutely. It's about how we're all wired.
Right. Like, we all respond to incentives and rewards and stuff.
Yeah, and that's what makes this so fascinating, right?
It is. It's like we've been talking about this in the context of ABA therapy, but it's so much bigger than that.
It is.
Like, I'm sitting here thinking about, like, my own life,
Right.
my own goals, my own, like, struggles with procrastination and stuff.
Right, because we all have those.
Oh, absolutely. And it's like, maybe these principles can help with that too.
Well, that's the thing. When you start to understand how reinforcement works,
Yeah.
you can start to apply it in all sorts of areas.
So it's like we're not just, like, passive recipients of reinforcement.
Right.
We can actually use it proactively to, like, shape our own behavior.
Exactly. We have the power to create our own reinforcing environments.
Okay, I like that. So, like, give me an example. How would you do that?
Well, let's take the example of, like, setting goals, right?
Okay, yeah, everyone's got goals.
Right. So often we set these big, audacious goals, and then we get discouraged when we don't achieve them immediately.
Oh, for sure. Like, I'm a master of that.
Right. But what if, instead of focusing on that end goal,
Okay.
we break it down into smaller, more manageable steps?
Okay.
And then we reinforce ourselves for each step we take.
So, like, celebrating the small wins along the way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because those small wins, they add up.
They do. They really do.
And they create that positive momentum.
It's like, instead of waiting to, like, reach the destination,
Right.
you're enjoying the journey.
Exactly. And that's what makes it sustainable. You know?
Right? Because if the only reward is, like, way off in the future,
Yeah.
it's easy to lose motivation.
It is. It's easy to get sidetracked or give up.
Okay, so how do we, like, actually do that? How do we reinforce ourselves? Because, like, I can't give myself a gold star every time I, like, do the dishes, right?
Right. Well, it depends on what works for you.
Okay, fair.
Because what's reinforcing for one person
Yeah.
might not be reinforcing for another.
Okay, so it's about finding your own currency, so to speak.
Exactly. So for some people, it might be something tangible.
Okay, like a treat or a new book or something.
Right. Or it could be something more experiential.
Like taking a break to watch your favorite show or something.
Exactly. Or it could be something as simple as just acknowledging your accomplishment.
Okay, so, like, giving yourself a pat on the back.
Yeah. Don't underestimate the power of that.
Right. Sometimes it's easy to forget to do that.
It is. It's easy to just move on to the next thing on the to-do list.
Right, without taking a moment to appreciate how far you've come.
Exactly. So it's about being mindful, being deliberate about recognizing your progress.
I like that. So it's like we're not just talking about, like, changing our behavior.
Right.
We're talking about changing our mindset, too.
Absolutely. It's about cultivating that growth mindset.
Where we're constantly learning and growing and celebrating our progress.
Exactly. And that's something we can all benefit from.
I think you're right.
No matter who we are or what our goals might be.
Well said. So as we wrap up our deep dive into ABA therapy and this whole idea of reinforcement, I think the biggest takeaway for me is that, like, this stuff, it's not just some, like, esoteric theory.
Right.
It's actually incredibly practical and applicable to our everyday lives.
It is. It's about understanding how our brains work.
Right?
And then using that knowledge to our advantage.
Exactly. It's about creating those positive feedback loops.
Yes.
That help us achieve our goals and live more fulfilling lives.
I love that.
And it's something we can all do, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's never too late to start incorporating these principles into your life.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It was my pleasure.
Always a pleasure to chat with you.
Likewise.
And to our listeners, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time for another deep dive.